Hi, folks. Welcome to this session at the intersection of trust-based philanthropy and changemaker well-being. My name is Gabe Oatley. I'm a reporter with Future of Good, and my pronouns are he and him. What is this panel about? This panel, as I said, is about the intersection between trust-based philanthropy and changemaker well-being. Trust-based philanthropy is very much having a moment right now. It's a set of practices that have evolved in response to some of the norms of traditional philanthropy, which have typically given a lot of power and control to grant makers and have sometimes meant a lot of paperwork and wasted time for grantees. Trust-based philanthropy practices ask grant makers, for instance, to give unrestricted dollars rather than project-based dollars. They ask grant makers to streamline their applications and to go beyond the check with their support for grantees. We've got a great group of panelists who are going to be joining to discuss this topic. But just before we do, I want to introduce two last quick points. The first is that I'm joining from sunny and kind of cold Toronto today. This is the territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Ojibwe, Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. And the second thing I want to note is that we really hope you participate in the chat. So please add your questions, and we will get as many of them in there as we go through this panel. With that, I want to welcome the panelists for this discussion on stage, and we'll hear a little bit from each of them. Folks, can I invite you to just share your name, your role, your organization, where you're joining from, and your pronouns. Maybe we're having a bit of difficulty. Okay, here we go. I've got some friends for this conversation. Thank goodness. That would have been a long hour. Lee, maybe you can go first.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gabe. My name's Lee. I'm currently the manager of community engagement. So I lead community engagement for TD Bank across Ontario. My pronouns are he, him. I'm coming to you today from Ottawa. So I live over on the Quebec side of Ottawa, but the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And I just want to share, I'm coming into this conversation as I style myself as a recovering executive director who's now found himself working in sort of the corporate philanthropy and sponsorship space. And coming into that space with experience on both sides. So I'll be sharing a little bit about sort of my journey as a change maker now working in a large system on that. And given the topic too of well-being, sharing that I'm also on a grief journey. My partner passed away suddenly about 11 months ago, actually 11 months ago today. So that has actually informed a lot of my practice, and I've been sharing openly about that. So wanted to just share that in advance in case things come up, and wanted to give people enough of a warning that I might be talking a little bit about that experience today. So thanks, Gabe.
Thanks, Lee. Shauna.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shauna Peddle. I'm the Associate Vice President of Citizenship at Cooperators. We're a cooperative financial services provider. Like Lee, I am also a recovering director who is now in a corporate space, so bringing all the learnings into this space to make our role better as a funder. I am joining you today from Guelph, Ontario. This is the lands of the Between the Lakes Treaty Territory, the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Etowah peoples. And my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. Thank you. Florian.
Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Florian Lemoine. I work for a family foundation based in Jojage, Montreal, called the Chamedi Foundation, and I'm the senior strategy and grants manager there. My pronouns are she, her.
Super. And last but definitely not least, Rod, who are you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rod Ruff. I am the president with Alberta Eco Trust Foundation. My pronouns are he and him. Today, I'm actually joining from Medicine Hat, Alberta, visiting some family down here. Our work at Eco Trust actually spans across the province of Alberta, and I'm usually located in Calgary, but I'm pleased to say I'm still on Treaty 7 territory today.
Fantastic. What a squad for today. Thanks all to you so much for joining. So trust-based philanthropy can mean a lot of different things. Florian, Rod, and Shauna, I'd love if you could each give us a sketch of your organization, briefly your foundation's origin story, who you fund, and sort of at what volume, and tell us about sort of where you're at with the use of trust-based philanthropy and how that has evolved over time. As a reporter, I know it's a terrible idea to ask 6 questions in one, but nonetheless, I'm going to do it and trust you to try and get that in like a 2-minute answer-ish. So first, I'll throw to you, Rod.
Sure. So I think what's important to talk about the Alberta EcoTrust origin story in the context of trust-based philanthropy is that it was very much a trust-building approach. Alberta EcoTrust was founded more than 30 years ago as a partnership organization and as a means to build trust between the corporate sector in Alberta and environmental nonprofits. And so in our history, we used a very unique governance model focused on consensus and building trust between those two sectors, and then to act as a trust fund to support community-based environmental projects in Alberta. And for us, we disperse around $1.6 to $2 million annually to charities and nonprofits undertaking work within our environmental focus areas. So we are an environmental funder. That is our primary focus. But we are also a fundraiser. So historically, we've operated on almost like a United Way type model where we raise money on an annual basis and then disperse it out and regrant it to those projects. We do manage endowment funds as well, so we do both. But in terms of trust-based philanthropy, we try to embrace those practices as a grant maker. But then because we're often dealing with grantors themselves and funders themselves, we are very much appreciative when different funders are taking on those approaches. And in terms of how our approaches evolved over time, I'd say, as I mentioned, EcoTrust was a trust building exercise largely in our history, which meant that, we had a very significant amount of administration involved in our grant making because we wanted to introduce these organizations to the corporate sector and give them the trust that these groups were there to do the right work and were well positioned to do it, and they had just get to know each other. Over time, we've been able to kind of dial back that administration because we felt like the trust was built, and so now there is a deep familiarity with the two sectors and the organizations doing the work, and so we can reduce that administrative burden to grantees and focus more on relationship development, strategic learning, and how we can all work together to achieve some of these societal objectives we're focused on. And the other kind of big change over time is that we've had more involvement from government over time in our work, both as a funder, but also as a member within our governance ecosystem. And that brings in a whole different set of philosophies with regard to funding, accountability approaches, and how we work alongside and with government. And so we're constantly trying to engage government to be a bit more flexible, be a bit more adaptive, and embrace this way of thinking.
Cool. Okay. Tons there to follow up on. Thanks for that. Florian, let's go to you next.
Sure. So the Chamedi Foundation, as I mentioned, is a family foundation, which is quite new in the foundation ecosystem. It was officially founded, I think, in 2015, but we've been really actively granting with our own team since 2018. And I joined in 2019. When I joined the foundation, I think it had been started around a pretty traditional model. There were not that many grants, but there were like big grants to like big organizations like hospitals, universities. I would say there was already like a trust-based philanthropy practice, which was that they were pretty much all multi-year grants. So there was that to build up on. But apart from that, it was a pretty traditional model. And in the past 4 or 5 years, there's been really a lot of change. And little by little, we've been trying to implement more and more trust-based philanthropy practices. So first of all, starting with an application process, which maybe is going to sound counterintuitive, but I did see it as like a fairness and equity practice about having like the same process for everyone, rather than it being like whether you can find someone in our team to talk to. Like little by little implementing more and more practices like funding, rent and salaries, which initially when I joined the team, there was kind of a message around like, we're not here to keep the lights on, which is quite pervasive in the sector. So there was initially that kind of thinking model. And then through time, we actually started funding rent, we started funding salaries, we started doing mission funding. We started accepting applications. And we also started during COVID an emergency fund, which means that for some specific cases, there is like no application process at all. There's just like a conversation between me and the grantee, and they can get a grant like the following weeks, basically, there, depending on the bank. So that's kind of a very quick summary of where we've come. Something else that we do too that I'd like to mention is that last year with inflation, we gave like a top up to all our partners, like a 3% top up. And since then, we've started to include that into our multi-year grants. So when we do a multi-year grants, even if our partners ask for the same amount, we like increase it year by year because unfortunately, we don't think life is going to get cheaper. So that's another example of a practice we've introduced. And just to finish, recently we finished our new strategic plan. And it was really a full circle moment for me because in this new strategic plan, we thought about what our values would be. And one of them is to be caring. And it includes, giving the right conditions, like the decent working conditions for the partners we work with. So I was really happy that we went from like one side to the other in some ways, without being perfect. There's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Shauna, let's go to you next.
Sure. So we are a cooperative financial services provider. We were created about 80 years ago, almost, to meet unmet needs in our community in a collective way. So that means that as a cooperative as well, like concern for community, it drives all of our work and our purpose for being. So I think that we come at things in a little bit of a different way. We don't have the stakeholder thing or the shareholder thing. Sorry, we don't have to worry so much about year over year profit and how much we're going to be making. We have more of a longer term view. And so I think that really translates into how our leaders, how our boards see the work that we do. And it means that we have support and we have a bit more autonomy, I think, as a citizenship team to be able to make those decisions and be able to really stand up and support our partners. We have a number of funding streams across the country. We're a national organization. We fund corporately in 4 areas. So social wellness, which for us means mental health for university-age students, an inclusive economy that supports employability for underserved young people and people with mental health challenges, in addition to financial resilience, environmental resilience, which supports individuals, organizations, governments in trying to adapt and to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and a more cooperative society. So that's bringing more young people into the cooperative model. It's also supporting young and upcoming co-ops because really, I think if more people got on board with co-ops, a lot of our problems would be solved in a very, very good way. That's, of course, my plug for co-ops.
Yeah.
We also have what's essentially a foundation, our Cooperators Community Funds. That was founded in 1995. And we also have an advisor community fund. So our advisors are about 600 offices across the country. And they're our eyes and ears into local communities. So they, of course, have their own interests and their own requirements and requests coming from their communities. So we have a fund that's specifically dedicated to topping up and giving them more money to be able to do the good work in their own communities. So we've invested last year about 12.1 million into communities across the country, which is just over 4% of our net income before taxes for anybody who follows that Imagine Canada Caring Company process. Our corporate giving, it's really evolved just really recently. I think that we've always had some form of philanthropy. We've had a foundation for 20, 30 years. But I think that very recently we've started to adapt the way that we work to be more trust-based. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. The first was a leadership influx on our team. So the VP, the AVP, we came from the charitable sector. We brought with us that deeper understanding of those challenges that are faced, the ways that funders can better support and reduce those power dynamics. And the second one, of course, the unspoken, was the pandemic. Just keeping the lights on and providing services became critical. And we were really forced to examine how we could be a better partner. Like Florian, we've also just increased the amounts for our grants to try and reduce that burden of inflation. So we, as well, are not perfect. We're very much on a journey in this work. A lot of the work that we do has been shaped and informed by powerful partners who are not afraid to ask the questions and to push us and to challenge us to do better and to work with them in a more meaningful way. And it's because of that we do the work that we do. And so we're really grateful for the partners that we have that really just make us better people overall.
Awesome. Such great overviews. Thanks, guys. And yeah, let's go to you next, Lee. maybe you can tell us about a main spot in your career where you've sort of intersected with trust-based philanthropy, or a spot where you've like seen it working well.
Yeah, thanks for that. And it's great to hear from the others folks in terms of like the types of things that you're thinking about, and the patterns I'm hearing. What I'm feeling now, even in my role at TD, is like that we don't have it set in stone, that we haven't got it all figured out just yet. Like my favorite Alanis Morissette song, like we're all just trying to figure things out and learn. And that's what I bring, sort of like, as I said, like a sector switcher now working in corporate, and trying to bring some of the things that I've learned from like trust-based philanthropy into a bigger, more complex system. And I'll share one example that I think works beautifully on both sides, sort of as an applicant, but also as a funder. In my previous role as the managing director of the Community Knowledge Exchange, which was a national organization that provided reflective practice and learning opportunities for change makers in the sector. We had a program called Cohort X, and the intake process was very thoughtfully designed. And so think of the organization CKX as kind of a trust broker, maybe between funders and people who are going to be participating in the program. And so we sort of leveraged our social capital and our positionality to say, like, we're going to go approach funders like community foundations, corporate funders, because we had a certain level of trust in sort of the capacity that we're doing, and to say that we're going to do something really cool and really radical with some young people that are doing some really awesome stuff at the intersections of gender and climate. But we're going to like shield you from the application process and all that. So you're going to trust us that we're going to do that. And the intake process for that, people could apply for the program. They could write a poem. They could share artwork. It was a very, like, we collected some demographic information, but how they presented what they were working on and the project that they were leading was completely open. And that signals a level of trust in terms of how you do that. And so I was constantly, with our traditional funders, we had all these questions about outcomes and impact. And I was like, please just trust this process and that we'll get that. And then when the money comes to support each participant, they got a stipend to support their work, and then also discretionary funding to support. And some of those participants use that to pay for childcare. Some people used it for yoga retreats. Some people, like, we worked with the participants to say, what is it that you need to be able to thrive during your experience? And so that was a new MacBook and a design suite for one partner who was really working on graphic design. And it was other things there. And so we leveraged, we took care of all of that so they could do their things. And then we did that translating with some of our funders who were paying for the programs to be able to give them the outcomes. I show that as an example now that I come into a large, pretty traditional space like TD Bank Group. I think, this is one of the oldest banks in Canada. And so I kind of bring a little bit of that, the processes that we use here and the things that I think about, I bring a lot of those questions into the space and ask, like, we've done similar incremental increases as well for some of the funding. And I think I just bring a little bit of that empathy and that understanding of like the change makers and the things that they're going through, having been the victim of having to submit a funding request, before. So I feel really fortunate in this position to be able to bring some of that firsthand experience and hopefully influence. And some changes are happening, which is pretty cool to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I suppose I'm curious, for you folks having like made shifts toward trust-based philanthropy in the organizations that you're working in, what the sort of like key catalysts for that shift were. I imagine there might be some other funders that are, participating in this webinar who are maybe curious or like keen to explore, but who feel like there are sort of really important things that they get from the information that they collect. Like, they don't do the longer applications to be, punishing meanies. Like, they do it for a really important reason so that they can, best steward the capital that they have been sort of entrusted to use most effectively. So maybe, Florian, can we go to you? Like, what prompted the Chamandy Foundation to sort of shift from, okay, we're going to focus pretty deeply on a couple of big grants to bigger institutions, hospitals, et cetera, to, it sounds like a wider number of grantees and, engaging with them in a slightly different way?
Sure. Yeah, something I forgot to mention in the 6 opening questions is that we donate a bit less than 5 million per year. all across Canada except BC and Ontario, and now mostly to like grassroots organizations that serve marginalized children and youth. So it has been a big cultural shift, even in some aspects. And I think one aspect which I hear every time someone asks these questions, like how did it happen? There's always someone, like I feel all of us today, someone saying like, well, I used to work for nonprofits, and I also used to do that, and I also used to do fundraising. And I think once you've done it, you can't really work for a foundation without at least trying to push different practices. Because otherwise it's just like too painful, I think, personally, even to see. And you know that it's also kind of preventing the nonprofits from doing their best work. So it's also like against kind of the interest of the foundation in some ways. So I think there was one factor. And another one was, I think for that to work, you also need to have like a leadership that's open to it. Because, you know, I could be like preaching whatever I want if there was no openness from my ED, and if she wasn't willing to be like a catalyst of that to the board, and the board wasn't also open to hearing about that, then it also wouldn't have worked. So I do think that it's just based philanthropy with the partners, but there's also, I see it as a whole chain of trust, you know, from within the organization and outside the organization as well. And everyone has like to trust the expertise of the others for it to move forward.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. So like any funder that's thinking about sort of shifting in this way should hire folks who have worked in the sector, who have gone through that painful experience of grant writing. That makes sense. Shauna, I'm curious that you mentioned a little bit about like the impact of COVID. We saw that a number of funders sort of moved toward trust-based philanthropy during the pandemic. Can you speak a little bit to sort of, what were the catalysts for you folks at Cooperators, and what role, if any, the pandemic played in that?
Sure. I'll keep saying this again and again, that we're not perfect. We're learning every day. I mentioned to the panel before we came on live that even after Vu's session yesterday afternoon, our team huddled and said, okay, what did we learn? What did we hear? And what can we do? And so I think that every conversation that we have is definitely supporting and driving us a little bit. I wanted to think about one specific catalyst moment. So it wasn't necessarily bringing on people, absolutely bringing on people who've worked in the sector, who understand and bring a bit of a different voice to the table. For me, it was one moment with one partner, and I won't name them just in case they're on this call, but it was a discussion that we had a couple of years ago. They'd come to us with just a cold call email asking for funding. And there was just something about this organization that we batted around as a team for a while. They were small. They didn't ask for a lot of money, but we couldn't quite fit. They didn't quite fit right into what we were trying to do and the impact that we were trying to have. But we also couldn't get them off our minds. So we set up a call. We decided amongst ourselves, yeah, we'll give them a shot and see what they say. And they basically said, yeah, absolutely. You know, we'll take your money, but we have no capacity to do anything more than we currently do. We're really good at what we do. We know the needs in the community that we serve. If you want us to do something different or create something new for you, we don't have capacity to do that. So if you are okay with just paying us to do what we do, great. We're happy to have you. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a good day.
Right.
And as funders, we're just looking at each other like, cool, right? Who is this person and how? So I think that was a catalyst moment for me personally to think, okay, we really need to think through what we can do to our partners and for our partners and with our partners to be able to make this happen for the majority of our partnerships. We still have our community funds that do have a granting program attached to that. We still have a cooperative development program that has a granting component. That will probably always be part of how we operate. There's always an opportunity to do that, and there's always an appetite. Our Cooperators Community Funds was just now this year, this particular funding round, twice as many as we normally get for applications. The demand is huge, and we're happy and we're proud to be able to give that money in that way. But I think that there's also an opportunity. About 80% of our partnerships are strictly because somebody came to us, they were recommended, we found them, and then we work together on shared goals. So that to us is where the real power lies. As for the pandemic, we had a number of partners come to us and say, we just don't have the capacity right now to do new things. The need is so great. People are coming to us in much bigger numbers. Our staff can't come to work. We have no volunteers. Can you help us? And it wasn't that it changed our approach to trust-based philanthropy, but it deepened those relationships in a really powerful way. So we got to know them as people. And I think that that was probably the biggest impact of the pandemic for us. We don't have 500 partners, right? We have 40. And so it's really, our granting takes us out a bit beyond that to maybe 100 or a little bit more every year. But we get to know them really well. And I think the pandemic just really deepened those relationships and humanized both sides of the table.
Mm. Love that. Maybe, Rod, I'm going to skip you on this question and ping to Lee on a sort of like related question, which is just, Shauna, you're speaking a little bit to like, during the pandemic, deepening relationships with some of your grantee partners, getting to know some of the like real deal challenges that they're experiencing. I wonder, Lee, if you can reflect a little bit on this question in terms of like trust-based philanthropy does invite closer relationships in some cases between grantor and grantee. Can you speak a little bit to like spots where that is good and can be really productive on both sides, and also where maybe this can go wrong? Like there is still a real power dynamic between grantor and grantee. And just curious for your reflections on that.
It's a beautiful question, and it's one that I live every day. I think in my role is when I accepted this job at TD, I was a little bit cautious and skeptical about like, hey, what am I going to do working for a big bank? I'm social justice change lead. What am I doing now over here? And it forced me to sort of reckon with my own sort of like, I'm going to show up in this role as my authentic self from day one. Like that's the only way that I could do that. I'm not a banker. I never wear a tie. I'm usually wearing jeans, and I put a blazer on today. But I was like, I'm going to show up as Lee. I'm queer. I've got this. I'm really advocating on sort of the things that I'm excited about, and do that. And I think that's become more acute for me personally over the last year with the sudden loss of my partner. Like I wear my grief on my sleeve, and I'm showing it, and I'm talking about it, and I'm not afraid to do that. And sometimes that radical sort of openness is uncomfortable for folks. Like it's not a thing that we do. And then you throw in the layer of like the funder-fundee relationship, which is like all the power dynamics that show up in that space. And I think for me in my practice, it's much better. And it does sometimes take more time, or it feels a little longer, to just be completely open and honest with people from the very beginning. And I think making a human connection, having some empathy, and being able to see myself in some of the role, or to articulate that I'm also just a person who's like working through the pandemic and doing community engagement from my dining room table, instead of like, you kind of do that. You build that trust by sort of being authentic, I think. So I think there's a level of authenticity. And that's like the good, the bad, the ugly, all of that. And I think coaching others to do that too, like on my team too, who are like, I have a few people on my team who are bankers by trade, and sort of like it's okay to talk a little bit more, ask that question and do that. I think where it can go wrong sometimes is sometimes, if that's not reciprocated, or if that becomes something where a partner might feel that they might use it against you in a way. And I experience that sometimes in different facets of my life, and also like professionally, where if there's not that equity or that sort of that reciprocity in the trust, that sometimes that openness or that the trust can sort of be broken. And it's better to know that sooner rather than deeper into a relationship, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, and no doubt like a tricky terrain in the sense that like you want to make sure you're, as a funder, not putting undue expectations on a grantee to share something they don't feel comfortable sharing with their funder. Like that's that's like a tightrope that takes a lot of sensitivity to like pay attention to, for sure.
And I think at the end of the day, it's like it's another person on the other side of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes like, I work for TD Bank Group, but I'm also Lee, and I'm talking to so-and-so. And I think that if I bring that to the conversation, hopefully the other person will also do that. And I've seen that sort of like reduce that tension sometimes between fundee when I show up as me first. And then, let's talk about all the trappings and the things that we have to go through. But we've built individual one-to-one or person-to-person trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right on. Yeah, and I wonder, for the other three folks, I'm curious about how using trust-based philanthropy practices have impacted sort of your well-being, the well-being of your colleagues, and any sense you have of like the well-being of your grantees? I don't know how easy it is to determine that. Maybe Rod, we can go to you on that first.
Yeah, well, I think for the groups that we fund and the grantees that we work with, I think there's just a general appreciation about the level of trust that we're trying to cultivate and the hands-off approach that's more focused on relationship development. I'm not sure how many grantees there would even be directly familiar with this idea of trust-based philanthropy, but they understand when they see it in practice. I think they respond really positively to it. And so I think it contributes to everyone's well-being and kind of lowering the temperature of trying to do social change work, which can be very kind of stress-inducing just in general. I think they really respond to just being available and being a human being that's responsive and willing to work with them when things aren't going right, to add value when they need help. And then I guess in terms of our own team's well-being or my well-being, again, power dynamics are really hard to navigate. I mean, it's not like, we're philanthropists or really wealthy individuals at Alberta Eco Trust or even, a large corporation where many of the people that work for us come from the NGO sector and have worked there for careers again. But then as soon as you are in this position, those dynamics emerge. And so I think we all want to focus on building relationships, but, how we navigate that power dynamic is still really tough. I think this makes it a lot easier. I think it can lead to increased impact by supporting the groups in this way, which I think brings everyone joy who does the work. So that's, I think, the primary ways it would influence well-being for us.
Yeah, cool. I really appreciate that note about sort of like where folks are coming from on your staff and how the funder role sort of like shifts some of the dynamics that might have been normal otherwise, folks who might have been, similar lived experience, maybe similar class experience, suddenly being put in this role where they have a bunch more power and struggling to, navigate that, and how trust-based philanthropy maybe asks for, I don't know, being a little bit more honest about those dynamics maybe than the traditional ways of working. Shauna, Florian, curious for your perspective on this around well-being and how you've seen it intersect with these practices.
Sure, I can start. Florian's okay with that. So about 80%, more than that, of our partnerships aren't application-based. They're relationship-based. So like I mentioned earlier, someone's recommended a group, or we have a great new partner right now who we met through another partner at an event, and they just wowed us. So we called them up and said, okay, so what can we do together? There's an alignment always in shared goals, but there's not necessarily a tough process. Our grant-based programs, they even don't start with a generic application on a website. So we say, email us, we'll start a real conversation, we'll actually talk to you, determine if there's a fit, and then that supports a more successful application. It also removes, if somebody isn't a good fit, it takes the burden off of them of trying to apply for something and being denied because they're not the right fit. So those processes, they allow us to work together on what we want to achieve together. That creates buy-in, it creates friendship, it creates trust. Even for those partners who we simply support their business as usual, we hope to reduce some of that stress by supporting what others won't. So what that means for our team is that we're no longer worry so much about the power dynamics that we've been talking about. We provide the cash, absolutely we do, but our partners bring so much expertise in the need and in the solutions. They're teaching us our approaches, our understanding of the needs, our approach in community is completely shaped by the partners that we have. And we fill in the gaps on our team through the partners that we choose, and we learn and we work together. And that is really, it's a joy to work this way. And it really is, every day you go home and you feel like you're just doing good work and you're doing it with good people. And that is absolutely the best thing that we can do for engagement of our team, for the mental health of our team, and hopefully for the mental health of our partners as well.
Okay, so it sounds like good vibes from cooperators on these.
We're a pretty happy team.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of transition on our team.
And what about Shamendi? Like, has this been miserable? Are you more deeply unhappy? Florian, sort of how has this shown up for you?
Yeah, it's no, I'm not deeply unhappy. It is complex though. I really agree with like Lee and Rod's point that it's hard to build relationships when there's such still always a power dynamic, and as long as there's someone who has the money, and as it's been mentioned in the forum, you can also question, like the systems behind that, and someone else who is asking for the funding. Like this is still the dynamic, and there's this saying that if you work for a foundation, your jokes will always be funny. And I mean, it's kind of like I heard this, I was like, wow, that kind of stings, but it's true, and it's kind of hard for me because I try to be like an authentic person, like kind of in all of my life. And I try to be, like professional, but also sincere. And when people are like warm with me, I'm like, are they truly being warm and because they're happy with the relationship, or are they being warm because they know they kind of have to do it to get more funding? And I also understand that. So that part is really hard, like to try to have deeper relationships, but without being too naive about it either. Probably like the one factor in the well-being aspect. And another factor that's not always easy is just the additional time that is needed to have this kind of relationship. And I know that on my end, we're like a team of like 3 people, 2 at the operational level, and we have like about 80 active partners. And I'm in charge. I'm the person who does all the follow-up. And so the reality is that I don't have enough time to like have, rich conversations with all of them as often as I would like to. And that can be a bit frustrating personally, but also that means that maybe we're not implementing these practices as well as we could. But that's also the constraints that we have. And also in terms of funding, even if we're very lucky to be a funder, we don't have, I wish I did, but we don't have an unlimited budget. And once you start having these practices, I don't know what's the other thing, but you also start having many more requests coming in, because this is, I think, what the sector needs to see more of. But a lot of funders don't fund rent, don't fund salaries. And so you have this kind of like wave coming at you, and you still have like the budget that was agreed on. And so that part is hard, to like, in a way, sometimes you like try to be the nice person, but then you're like, well, I'm still a funder. So yeah, that just stays here. But on the plus side, obviously, I'd still much rather have to deal with these challenges than having a traditional, very rigid model where I'm more like a cop really than a partner, when I'm just like doing kind of accounting and just like strict like following. Like I think I personally wouldn't be happy in this kind of work. Like that's not what I came in for. And there's a lot of intellectual growth that comes with just learning about all these wonderful organizations, about all the causes they work for. Like I learn new things every day, and I think that's like, it sounds cheesy, but it's so important for well-being. And on the partner side, we have very good feedback. Obviously, again, coming to the power dynamic, it's hard to know how much of that is true. A new practice we're going to try this year is to have an anonymous survey that we'll send to all our grantees, specifically around how we do. So like asking them to evaluate us anonymously. We already had a question around that in our yearly report, but it wasn't anonymous. So, it was only worth what it was. And we'll see what comes up.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
You tell the best jokes.
Yeah, I know. I know. So we'll see what that shows. But we've heard overall very good feedback, and a lot of partners who want to keep working with us.
Awesome. Yeah, you're sort of taking in this direction already. I wonder if we can hear a little bit more about some of the barriers to implementing trust-based philanthropy. Florian, you were mentioning just that, it takes a bunch of time. One of the practices in the suite of trust-based philanthropy sort of approaches is funders doing their homework, sort of not asking for grantees to fill out information that it's possible for the funder to find. So not asking them to fill out their address or their phone number or, those sorts of basic details. So yeah, it takes more time than just asking for that information. Rod, curious, maybe we can go to you next. Like, what have been some of the challenges for you folks in implementing these practices?
Sure. I think time is definitely a big one, because if you embrace a more relational approach, you'll spend a lot more time getting to know the organizations and people doing the work, which is rewarding, but it does take a lot more time than just reading an application in many cases. We really retooled some of our funding programs in the last few years to reduce that administrative burden and create low barrier application processes. And then again, we just saw like the volume of applicants, like Florian just said, increased dramatically. And because we have that relational approach, that means 3 times the amount of meetings to kind of get to know and understand the projects. And so doing the work and doing the homework takes more time, and we just had to prepare our team to take that on. And then when you kind of switch the gears to reporting, I think again we've been dealing with the barriers that are just inherent in the Canadian system with respect to how you can work with grantees. EcoTrust has always tried to work with intermediaries, because in Alberta, I would say half of the environmental nonprofits who operate here don't have charitable status. And so we'd enter into intermediary relationships with them, which creates all kinds of different reporting requirements just to comply with the regulator. So been really happy to see changes coming, even though they're still probably not as trust-based as we'd all like. But again, we always kind of have to work within the confines that have been given to us, as much as we'd like to not. And so those would be the main barriers, I think, that we faced more recently. I think the one other thing I'd like to kind of highlight is, because Florian talked about surveying, we did some anonymous surveying of our grantees, which just gave us a whole different set of perspectives than the usual kind of check-ins we do. Usually we ask grantees, as they submit their final reports about their experience. We don't ask them if we're funny, but I think I would agree that you would not get the answer you like. But usually they're way too positive, I think, on things like grant administration at that point. And so when we did anonymous surveying, we got a whole different set of answers about how much time they're committing to doing the work, what's the actual return on investment for the funding we're giving. Even asking them questions like, is this reporting advancing your own strategic thinking? Is it helping you learn as an organization? The answers are almost all overwhelmingly, no, not really. And when we do the work internally, we got the same thing. And so we really kind of use that as an indicator to kind of really sit down with the community and think about how we can do this in a way that makes everyone's life easier.
And has it been based on that feedback, given the funders that sort of you're getting money from on the other side, has it been possible to shift to not sort of ask the questions that get the information that your funders want?
I think so. I think while a lot of our funding comes from the corporate sector, I think they're right with us on this learning journey and implementation of trust-based philanthropy. And so they like to see how we're doing it so they can adapt their own practices and do it the similar way. As for when we receive money from government, not quite, just because, we're trying to be compliant with so many different expectations, and we try and do what we can, but it's still a work in progress in terms of if you're receiving and redistributing funding that's coming from different levels of government, how you can meet their accountability expectations and not make grantees go crazy.
Totally. Shauna, what's been hard about this shift for you folks?
I think that I would echo a lot of what was just said about, the funny jokes. I will remember that forever. Thank you so much for that. There is always a power dynamic, and the lack of being able to freely tell us what we're doing wrong and how we can fix it. Sometimes that does trip us up a little bit. The biggest one, though, for me, and I think I want to bring this home for everybody, is that funders are expected to report up in traditional systems. And we're not bad people. We're not leaving the house every day trying to make more work or to make things more difficult for our partners or to overburden or overtax. We have our own internal expectations, our own internal audiences, like the boards that expect impact reporting. So what we've been trying to do and been really successful in over the past 3 or 4 years is taking our senior leaders along with us in this journey. So it's not just our small citizenship team trying to fight against the machine. We're bringing them along with us. We bring in our partners to meet and talk with them. We bring in leaders in the impact world to educate around what impact really means. What does it look like? How to tell the stories rather than checking boxes and spreadsheet dashboards that really don't mean anything. So we recently brought our foundation board just before Christmas. We had a meeting and we brought them on a tour of a partner organization. The previous mental health session had Asante from Stella's Place. So that was the organization that we chose. And we brought this board who are all, they all do their own thing. They're not involved necessarily in the charitable sector, but they are our foundation board, the community cooperators, community funds. And they came with us. They saw that site. They met the participants. They sat with them. We spent a couple of hours in this space learning how our support helps that organization and helps the recipients of that support. And they were absolutely changed by that. Some of our board members who've never had an experience like that. And so it's all about rethinking how we think internally and how we report on impact, so that that biggest barrier, that mindset of the people that we report to, once they relax and they understand that we're doing the good work, we can relax as a team. And then that helps us to help our partners to relax. So I think the biggest barrier, and I would assume most of the funders on this call are facing the same challenges, is who you report into internally. It's slow and it's measured, but it's possible to bring them along with you on this journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think interestingly, like it's not quite a trust-based philanthropy practice, but it's sort of in this bucket of transforming philanthropy. Just did a story on a foundation that decided to spend down, sort of fully, like spend out all of their assets. And they had a board that increasingly sort of had more and more folks from the community onto it. It used to be it was a family foundation, but over time there came to be no members of the family on the board. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of tweak, and made me wonder, about how maybe some of what can help along these processes is having different voices, in the same way as like having folks from the community sector on staff changes things. So too does it on the board. Maybe I want to go to sort of critiques of trust-based philanthropy that have been popping up, and Lee, maybe going to you first on this question. There was actually, before I do that, I want to just note, we've had like no questions in the chat. If anybody wants to ask a question, I know I'm asking terrific questions, but if you have a better question, put it in the chat so we can get to it before we wrap up in 13 or so minutes. Okay, that plug aside, there was
beautiful questions, and I'm not just saying that because you're the moderator and you're facilitating this.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. There was a recent op-ed in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. It was by an executive of a foundation that had tried using sort of more trust-based practices. They provide a lot of support for veterans organizations, but they ultimately decided to shift back to more of what they described as like a command and control type approach. The thrust of the argument was like, there's a lot of like feel-good vibes with trust-based philanthropy, but that actually command and control allows for like more precision. They can see when things are going sideways because of the data that they're collecting, and they can sort of support grantees to make changes or drop those grantees and work with a group that is performing better. Maybe Lee, curious for your perspective on that critique, sort of, does that hold water? Are there particular funders where trust-based philanthropy doesn't work very well?
Yeah, I'm going to frame this in sort of use another. I'm a bit of an agnostic and a bit of a process. A relentless incrementalist is a term that that Alison Hewitt gave me a few years ago, that I just hold on to this in terms of like, that's how I show up in the world, is like, the continual pursuit of relentless incrementalism. I'm not going to change the world every single day, but I'm going to move it a little bit forward. And I think I use the example of like collective impact, capital C, capital I, trademark FSG, Stanford Social Innovation View, 5 conditions, 5 preconditions. Like, that's a pretty comprehensive rubric. And it becomes a buzzword, right? These types of things like collective impact, trust-based philanthropy, they do risk sometimes being like, oh, you're not you're not doing trust-based philanthropy. Well, we're not going to work with you. And so sometimes these things, these frameworks create even like command and control. Like, they create like a binary or this or that. And I try to view things in terms of a spectrum of like, yeah, maybe TD Bank is probably not going to be the leader in trust-based philanthropy and those kinds of things, but there are trust-based practices that I can bring into the work that I'm doing here. And same thing for, maybe I didn't hire a high-paid consultant to create a collective impact framework for this project that I'm doing, but it is collective impact. It is doing that. So I think sometimes we get bogged down in we're this or that. And I think that the pursuit of relentless incrementalism in like, we're going to get there, is let's take these elements and let's shift things a little bit. And I see the potential sometimes. The system that I'm working in now, TD Bank Group, is a much bigger, much more complex system than I was the ED of a small charity with 4 people doing a little bit of work. And so being able to shift things a little bit here, the impact is different in those kinds of ways. So a couple of reflections on that, but I kind of hold those things, and I can do that. And I can still also question sort of the methodology and sort of the rigidity sometimes on that we're one or the other. And I kind of reject that premise altogether.
Florian, maybe over to you next on this question. Is trust-based philanthropy just fuzzy, feel-good vibes?
I really agree with what Lee said in terms of it, like our world just having a very black and white kind of analysis in general. The article in question was very interesting, I found. So it was like an organization helping veterans in the US. And what struck me when I read the article, I thought, that their so-called command and control approach, to me, again, to Lee's point, had some elements of trust-based philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And I actually found that their new model had a lot of capacity building. They were saying how they provided like individual coaching to leaders, and how they would sit down with them and agree on indicators together. I'm just extrapolating from the article. And so all of this, I was like, this is capacity building. This is also something that some organizations need, and they only work with veterans, so they're very specialized. So hopefully they have staff that is also specialized that can have valuable input. So it's just an example. So in their case, I was like, maybe that does work better. And it did sound like their first maybe understanding of trust-based philanthropy was, it sounded like they gave grants with pretty much no selection and pretty much no follow-up. And for me, that's not how we define trust-based philanthropy either. It's just doing these things differently. That's what I wanted to mention. But for me, for instance, given that we fund so many different causes, from mental health to housing to sexual exploitation, I would never have even the capacity to do this control and command model, because I don't have the time to be on the back of every of my partners every day, and I would be completely irrelevant because I don't have that expertise. So I do really think that it's not the new Bible or Quran or whatever. Mm. It's something that has to be adapted to specific cases.
Mm. Yeah, but the point you're making there that for funders that are funding quite broadly across a bunch of different topic areas, to have the expertise to sort of make these tweak decisions that a funder might want to with a command and control. It's pretty tough to do that if you're funding very broadly. That makes a lot of sense. I guess, Rod, I'm curious for your perspective, especially as somebody who is interfacing with government. As citizens, I think we demand a pretty high level of, ideally, we demand a pretty high level of accountability from our governments. And it is good that we're able to track down information when, the government overspends by millions and millions on an app, for instance, during COVID. I guess I'm curious for your perspective, is government a spot where trust-based philanthropy just it ain't gonna work?
That's a tough question. I think it can. I just think, if it's going to ultimately lead to greater outcomes and greater impact, then of course, I think government would like to see that. And I guess government lingo, that'd be value for money, which I would never really kind of say. But I think if this works and it makes us more effective funders, but also more effective organizations delivering the work, then I'm sure government should be all for it, as long as accountability is still in place. And I think the whole movement of trust-based approaches and philanthropy comes from that acknowledgement that the voluntary sector is here. They are good at what they do. They can be trusted to do the work. And I actually don't lose any sleep on the accountability question, because I just know 99.9% of the time things are taken care of. And I think, in terms of the concerns that have been raised about trust-based philanthropy as a feel-good exercise, I don't see that. I mean, command and control is a weird way of putting it. I just think we all have a role to play creating positive social change, whether we're funders, government, or otherwise. I don't necessarily like the kind of set it and forget it approach to philanthropy or funding, because if we can demonstrate authentic proof of impacts, that unlocks more resources for the work that we're all trying to do. At EcoTrust, we really kind of shifted our approach because of that. We used to have, I guess you'd call it 1,000 flowers blooming, where you just fund good projects and good organizations and help them achieve their mission. Because we got contracted by government to design some grant programs that were more outcome oriented, where we could say, hey, look, there is a huge sector here that can help you achieve these outcomes. It was wildly successful, just to kind of point and direct and find that kind of precision towards impact and outcomes. And so we kind of retooled our whole approach. So it's still supporting the sector to achieve these shared objectives that we're all focused on, but it makes us more effective advocates, both in the community and to government. It helps us unlock strategic learning from all those projects we're supporting, facilitate collaboration, and really cultivate an ecosystem of actors working in this space. And so I do think that there has to be some measure of precision to kind of make us all more effective in the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Sean, if there is something burning you want to say on that, I feel like we've gone through that one pretty well. Is there anything burning you want to say, or can I jump to the next question?
The only thing that's burning for me is that not every partner is going to have the same amount of impact. So how in the world can we measure that impact across a straight line? All of our partners are at different points on a spectrum of change. And so the command and control doesn't allow for that. So that's all I wanted to say.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah, maybe as we sort of get to our closing here, I'm sure there are lots of folks who are listening who don't work for a funder, who work for a nonprofit or charity or grassroots group. For those organizations that wish that their funders had shorter applications, or wish that they didn't have to sort of fill out the exact same questions, or do quarterly reports rather than an annual report or what have you, what is within their locus of control to do? You folks have described, getting a lot of good feedback and not as much straight talk as you might like. How would you what can organizations do to shift their funders in this direction while not putting themselves and their organizations at risk?
I can jump in on that one.
Perfect.
I would say every organization who's listening to this call today has a favorite funder or 4 favorite funders. Start with them. You're not going to change everybody all at once. You know who you're aligned with in terms of philosophy and belief and ways of working, and start with them first, and be open and be frank, and talk to your funders about what you're up against, what your dreams are. What's that passion project that no one else will fund? Those are my sweet spots. I've started asking our partners that. What's the one thing nobody else will give you money to do? Cool, we'll fund that. And so, like I said before, we're not here to make your lives difficult. We're good people. We're in these roles for a reason. We love what we do. And having those conversations and creating a safe space to have them is really what makes our jobs much better. So I'm going to say to be bold and to find the funders that want to walk with you rather than dragging you along behind them to meet their needs. So that, I think, would be my leaving point.
Awesome. We've got time for maybe one more 30-second answer. Who wants to jump in with the last thought on this one? Oh, too high pressure. Too high pressure. Any last word anyone wants to share?
Maybe something just to bounce on what Rod was saying. I do think that as a society, for trust-based philanthropy to work, as a society, we need to trust the nonprofit sector more. Because one of the biggest barriers in general for funders is to engage the board. But just as, we're humans, the board are humans too. And I think the problem is that they've also been socialized in an environment where we tell people to be kind of careful about who you donate to, even when it's your $20 personal donation. There's a lot of I find distrust towards the sector, which I've never really quite understood. I agree with Rod. I've worked in this sector for nearly 15 years. Like I haven't seen a single case of like embezzlement or whichever. So I think there's also like a collective work to do about that to maybe like showcase even more the wonderful work that our partners are doing, and to, as foundations, as funders together, share about this work and how when we try things different, like it can also work or sometimes not work. But I think there's like a bigger trust issue in our society, and I hope that we can also make progress on that.
Wonderful. Such a good spot to end. Thank you so much for making the time, Lee, Shauna, Florian, Rod. Thanks so much for joining and sharing such thoughtful reflections to these questions. And thanks to everybody for joining in, participating in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions.